Hello and welcome to the Inspiring Life School podcast. This is your host, Vidakovic, and on this podcast, I'll be sharing with you the most valuable strategies to live your one wildly beautiful and most precious life. Because this is it, my friend. In case you haven't guessed, when it comes to life, there's no rewind or pause button that exists. They say that the way that you spend your days is the way that you spend your life. So my one and only goal here is to help you stop wasting your time, stop holding yourself back in life, stop experiencing non-stop negative mind chatter, stop just dreaming without doing, and start living life fearlessly instead, with more purpose, focus, and intention. I sincerely want you to live life in a way that when you come to the end of it, you know deep down in your heart that you 100% gave it your all, flaws and all. This podcast is not about doing life perfectly. Instead, it is about experiencing and living life with more clarity and courage and truly appreciating this precious adventure that we are so blessed to be on. So if you're with me here today, it's time to stop spinning in circles, get off the hamster wheel for good, put your hands back on the steering wheel of your life, and finally start living life in a way that you won't later regret. With that being said, let's dive on in. Hello, my friends. This is Frances Vidakovic, and you are listening to the Inspiring Life School podcast. And today we're going to have a conversation that is really dear to my heart. And it's about having really important conversations with your elders. So I don't know if you're like me, like I'm surrounded by older people. We've had our in-laws, my husband's parents, live with us over the last 12 years. My father-in-law actually passed away last year, but we built them a granny flat because it was so important. The granny flat's in the back of our property, by the way. It was so important for me to have an environment where my kids grew up really having close relationships with their grandparents. So they would see their paternal grandparents every single day for the last 12 years. And my own parents, who I'm really close to, we make sure that at least once a week we get together for a big family dinner involving all my sisters and all the nieces and cousins and so forth. So over the last year or so, I've been really focused on having conversations that matter with the people that I love. So rather than just having shallow conversations where you're chit-chatting about everyday stuff, I want to go deep. I want to connect on this soul level. And the way that you do this is by asking questions that matter. So this is going to involve me taking you back in time, sharing a story from my past, where a few years ago, I was at the beach with my kids, and on the way home, we passed my parents' place, and I thought, I'm just going to pop on in and say hello. So it was a late Sunday afternoon. They were home. We sat down in the living room, and for the first time ever, I took the time to actually really delve into their past, or what it was like for them growing up in Croatia in poverty, what it was like for them to come to Australia with literally nothing, like an empty suitcase, no money to their name, and start afresh and new in a country where they literally could not speak the language. So I have a really popular blog post that I'm going to link to this episode in the show notes. It's called 200 Questions to Ask Your Parents. And of course, you can ask your grandparents or anyone that's older than you that you're interested to know, what was their life like growing up? What's made them who they are today? And what followed on this afternoon, which is probably one of the standout afternoons in my life, was that I pulled out my phone and I recorded this 1 to 2 hour conversation that we had, where I literally discovered things about my parents that I'd never known. I'd made it to the age of 40 plus, and I did not know these things about my parents. I didn't know that my dad and my mom did not have a toothbrush. They did not own a toothbrush till they were age 12. They would have I think my dad said they didn't have his first pair of shoes until he was over 10. And then what it was like growing up with no money, with no food. How did they survive? What it was like growing up in a village. I recorded this conversation, and to date, that is probably one of my most precious, if you call that a possession, a voice recording. But I'm so grateful that I took the time to ask those questions and took the time to listen. And I have to say, we did it once again with my in-laws, my husband's parents. And that took place during the first pandemic Easter. We normally have really big Easter celebrations with all our extended family. And this was when we were just alone, just alone with my in-laws. And I had lived with them for so long, they were in the granny flat behind us. And yet I'd never taken the time to discover all the amazing experiences that they had experienced growing up in a different country, in a different time, in a different era. And I think that myself and the kids, we just sat there our mouths were dropped, and we were listening to my mother-in-law speak about having to leave home at 13 to go to the country's capital, having no contact with her parents again, and how she survived, what did she do? What was life like? And it was just so incredible because their experiences, the elders that are currently in this world, is so different from the life that our kids growing up today are accustomed to. So what I want to be encouraging you to do as part of listening to this episode is take the time to have conversations with your parents or your grandparents or your elders, the conversations that matter, like those deep conversations that really lead you to discover things that you didn't know about that person. And if you really want to build strong and healthy relationships with your parents and your in-laws and your grandparents, be brave enough today to start conversations that actually matter, because you might think that you know them really well, but just because you're spending time with someone doesn't mean that you know them on a deep level. Like, I think about some of the companies and businesses that I worked for before I started working at home. Like, there were people that I worked with and saw every single day. I didn't really know them because I didn't ask them the questions that matter. And you have to remember, like, your elders have been here on this planet years before you ever arrived. So it's just some questions. I'm going to share with you some examples. Like I said before, I'm going to share the link in this description, the podcast description. But these questions are going to open your mind to new knowledge about your elders. And this list that I'm going to be providing you with includes a massive list of questions. And it was created with the goal of encouraging you to start those conversations today. And if you feel like you're stuck with what to ask them, just consider just picking any random questions from this enormous list that I'm going to be providing you with. And the questions really cover so many different aspects of a person's life. And they're designed to help you kickstart this conversation that takes you on a journey. It's either going to be a really quick journey or a super long trip back into their history. Just ask them whatever questions you feel like asking them and press record. Okay, I think that's the most important thing. Create almost like a memento or a legacy of their life and have it recorded so that you can share it with, your future grandchildren and so on, anyone that is interested in knowing more about that person in the future. Now, you may not really understand or appreciate the importance of this now, but I promise you, the future generations are going to appreciate efforts so much more in the future, because these memories of the people that you love are so precious. And I have no doubt that you're going to ultimately treasure them so much more in the future once they have passed, having either this audio recording or this video footage that's going to bring them to life long after they're gone. And I really do think that you're going to be surprised to discover just how little or well you know your own parents and grandparents. You might think that you know everything about them, but once you start asking these questions, you are going to be just shocked to see how much more there is inside of them, all of these memories. So just some example questions include asking them what was a typical school day for you back as a kid? What sort of music did you listen to? Did you even have an opportunity to listen to music? How did you spend your time? What were your friends like? Tell me about your parents, about your siblings, about the home that you lived in, about your neighborhood. What did you do every afternoon after school? Have you ever had your heart broken? Were you ever scared of anything? And what was your most prized possession as a kid? Now, I could probably go on and on. So just make sure that you reference the blog post after listening to this episode. You're going to find it in the podcast description, and you can use it as a really good starting point for having these conversations. Now, I really want to stress that this isn't just a one-off thing. You have this one conversation, you speak for 1 hour, and you never touch upon it again. Did you know that every single time that you spend time with the people that you love who are older than you, you have an opportunity to start these conversations and have them again and again and again. And the really weird thing is, and it's probably when we have our own conversations with our own kids, is that we always remember something new, something that didn't come to mind the first time you were chatting about your past and how you grew up is going to come to light the next time. So I just want you to consider that they could be just a wealth of wisdom, a treasure chest of wisdom, and that you have the opportunity to tap into it every single time. And you know what? Most of the time we realize how important these conversations are after someone has passed, and we realize, oh my gosh, I really wish I'd asked them more about this. Now is the time to do so. Now is the time to have these important conversations and to make sure that you're taking the opportunity to preserve these stories, preserve those memories. You can do it via either audio recordings or video footage. And I just want to end this episode by sharing with you something I think is really special that I've done myself. So back when my kids were really young, it was actually when my son was born. He was still a baby. And I remember thinking I have so many amazing stories to share with them, but there's a chance once they get to the age that they'll really appreciate it, I'm just going to forget it. So what I started doing during my son's first year was every night when my kids would both go to bed, I would turn on my computer and I would write. I'd write the story of my life. So it's almost like I was writing my own memoir. And by the end of that first year, before Jake hit his first birthday, I had written 100,000 words, and I actually published 2 private copies of that book. So at the moment, I have a little memoir of all the stories that I could remember about growing up, my life, the things that I remember my parents sharing with me. I published only 2 copies of that book, and that is something that I'm going to be gifting my kids with later. And the funny thing is, I'm so glad that I took the time to write those stories down years ago. It's 16 years now, because to be honest, as you get older, you really do feel as if you are forgetting. So I'm super glad that I took the time to do so. And I didn't really have that much time to write. I was an exhausted new mom, and I think that I would type maybe 30 minutes minutes to an hour like before, I just totally crushed. But I just want you to know that you can do the same. Preserve your story, write them down, just start a Google Doc today. And whenever you remember something, like write it down, record it, because your future generations, your kids are going to appreciate it so much. I promise you. And that is it for today's episode, my friend. It's all about having important conversations with the people that matter to you, respecting your elders, respecting that they have so much wisdom about life that they can share with you, but you're never going to discover it unless you take the time to ask. And so, as always, I love and appreciate you all so much. Thank you for being with me here today, and I will catch you on the next episode, my friend. Thank you so much for listening to the Inspiring Life School podcast. I really appreciate you allowing me to be a part of your life. If you'd love to stay in touch, please know that you can always find me on Instagram at Vidakovic, or you can visit my website, inspiringmumlife.com, where you can sign up and receive so many amazing freebies that I've created just for you to help you implement all my teachings into practice. There you'll also find all my online courses, resources and programs that I've created to help you uplevel your life in seriously the simplest way possible, so that you can ultimately create for yourself a life that feels simpler, lighter, and allows you to show up in a way that you love as your best and most authentic version of yourself. Now remember, this podcast is all about not just dreaming but also doing, because to create true sustainable change in your life, you need to be willing to do things differently. And that's what I'm here to support you to do every single step along the way, so that you too can begin to live your one wild and precious life with less stress, less overwhelm, less drama, and instead with zero regrets. Finally, if this podcast resonates with you at all and you appreciate the content, I would absolutely love for you to show your support by leaving me a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm on a mission to help more people wake up to the preciousness of life and to help them live their days with more intention and purpose, and your review will help make this goal of mine possible. Well, once again, thank you so much. I have loved spending this time with you, and I look forward to connecting with you again. I'm Vidakovic, and you have been listening to the Inspiring Life School podcast.